Hello, good evening, guys. Welcome back, scholars. I hope everyone is doing well and I hope everybody had a good day today. Right? I know. Today I'm going to take a class for 11th standard for the first time. So, I hope there's a whole another set of new audience today. But before that, I would just like to give a brief introduction about myself because obviously the first audience, right? So, yeah, I am Nikitha and I'm the history educator here at Unacademy Scholars channel. And yes, I have already taken a couple of classes for standard 12. From today, I will be taking classes for standard 11th as well alongside class 12. So I will tell you all my timetable and the timings of the classes in the next couple of slides. But before that, let's quickly greet each other. Hello Ria, good evening. Anyway, so we'll just wait for a couple of minutes for other people to join as well. In the meantime, we can do like the introductory part of the presentation, right? Yes, so before diving deep into the topic for today, which is chapter 1 for 11th standard students, I would like to brief you all about some of the Unacademy Plus benefits and features y'all can avail by subscribing to Unacademy Plus, right? So the first of all is you can actually listen to some of the live classes taught by few top educators of India, which are accessible on one platform, like all on a single platform, right? And there's also unlimited access to a number of courses along with regular doubt solving sessions and also answer writing sessions. You can also take part in regular practice tests and live test series. And another point not to forget is that there's exhaustive coverage of syllabus, as in like a point to point, a theme to theme is covered at Unacademy Plus platform. So that basically means you don't have to worry about missing out on a particular topic, right? So according to your syllabus for the board examinations, like everything will be covered. And there's also mentorship given to you along with guidance as to how to go about it. And there's also access to study materials in the form of PDF, which you can later refer to for any queries or doubts, right? And Unacademy pricing for the plus subscriptions, as you can see on the screen, are of 5 types. Firstly, it is a 6-month subscription, then it's a 12-month, 15, 18 and 24. So the prices are very much visible on the screen, and the catch here is that the longer period of time you actually take a subscription for, the more beneficial it's going to be for you, because at the end of the day, by subscribing for a longer period, you are going to save yourself a couple of bucks. So that is that. And apart from Unacademy Plus, Unacademy also has iconic subscriptions. Here, the basic difference is that the features are even better and greater. Such as you'll have like a personal mentor, like a one-on-one conversations you can hold with him or her, and you can literally go to him for any guidance or any doubts you have regarding the subject. There are also live doubt solving sessions along with weekly reports provided to you based on your last week's performance, right? So that will basically tell you where you stand and which area you can improve on. And there's also a direct parent connect along with study planners given to you. So that basically means the subscriptions for Unacademy Plus and Iconic are similar, like the ranges are similar. It's a 6-month, 12-month, 15, 18 and 24 respectively. The same hack is applied here as well. The longer duration, the more beneficial, right? Yes. So I see a couple of other people joining. Hi Sheba, good evening. Hi Sujal. Regarding your your question, Sujal, about this chapter not being there, I know that, like I've looked at the syllabus very recently, but your second chapter is still a part of the board examination syllabus, right? Like regarding the city life and all. So basically what I'm going to do today is do a introduction. Like if you go through the pages of your textbook, there's an introduction for every theme you have, right? Like for example, let's say in the section 1 of your textbook, there are altogether 4 sections in your textbook, right? So in the section 1 we have 2 themes beneath it. The first is the beginning of life, the beginning of time, and the second is writing and city life, right? So for these 2 chapters there is an introduction. So mostly I will be dealing with that particular introduction today. So but like here and there we might encounter points from theme 1 as well, but that's okay. It's good to know, even though it comes in your board examinations or not. But mostly we'll focusing on the introduction part, stressing on theme 2. So that, I hope that clarifies your thing, right? So yes, but before diving deep, I would just like to brief you about the class timetable and the timings, because this is the first time I'm taking a class for standard 11th. So 11th standard student might not know about my timings, right? So on every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, which are like alternative days, there will be history class at 6 p.m. every day for standard 11th. No matter which day of the week it is, the classes are going to start at 6 p.m. sharp, and Tuesday, Thursday and Saturdays are for 11th standard students, and Monday, Wednesday and Friday the classes are going to be for 12th standard kids, right? And obviously Sunday is a holiday, as all of us know. Yes. Cool. So that was about the timings. If you all have any questions regarding that, please put them down in the chat box. Sujal, regarding the chapter being already done by Swamya ma'am, I get that, but this acts like a revision, or like people who might have missed out on those classes. So yes, y'all can attend my classes, right? Cool. We will start. The introduction is already given to section 1. There's theme 1 and theme 2, obviously. The focus for today's class will basically be on the introduction for chapter 1 and 2, right? So the first theme is how, the human existence came into being. Like how did humans appear on earth first, right? So we will be talking about that process of human evolution right from the very beginning, right from the time when we don't even have like proper resources to look at, right? So this basically dates back to around more than 1 million years ago, right? Like not just 1 million, but like a lot, like several million years ago. So basically we'll be talking about a time frame which extends through a lot of years. I know this might be a little bit confusing because we're dealing with a lot of like a longer period of time within a short while, so it might be confusing. But again, that is why I'm reiterating my point that you don't have to remember every particular date or a year which comes up. Just roughly remember like 2 or 3. When the time comes, when I'm dealing with that particular slide, I will tell you if it is worth remembering or not, right? So don't worry about the dates. Yes, so we have a lot of sub themes beneath the first chapter, right? Like which is beginnings of human existence. So here we'll look at how basically the chapter deals with how humans first emerged in the continent of Africa. Like back then we did not have the separation of 7 continents, right? Like back then we just had like a single landmass. So the area where we have the present African continent right now, that was the place where humans emerged for the first time a lot of million years ago. And we'll also look at how we know about their existence, right? Like even if we go to Africa right now, we can't be like, okay fine, at some point of time some humans existed. We can't say that. Some scientific study has to happen. So that is where the archaeologists come into the picture. What basically does archaeologists do, right? So they go and dig the earth deep down in various vertical and horizontal layers, and they come across various fossils, or like basically plants and animal remains, including bones, right? And also stone tools. Like early people must have used a lot of tools, usually made up of stone, for various activities, right? So when you look at all these things after discovering them, when you study them through various scientific processes, that is how you get to know to which period does this person belong to, right? So, and also just like a rough timeline again, just have like a rough timeline in head. Again, don't need to remember the exact dates. um, Almost about 5.6 million years ago, like you can see the figure here, it's 5.6 million years ago, ancestors, the first humans were found on earth, right? It was 5.6 million years ago, but those were not the form of humans we know right now. Like if you look at us, we are modern humans, we are called as modern humans, but before 5.6 million years ago, these were not modern humans which were found, but they were some kind of humans which evolved from apes or other animals, right? But as you go ahead, almost around 200,000 years ago, that is when you actually first encounter the modern form of humans, right? So these humans are basically called as Neanderthals, right? Again, a technical term, Neanderthals. They were first found on earth 200,000 years ago, right? So that was like a brief introduction to what kind of humans existed back then, and we basically are categorized as modern humans, and the first modern human found on earth was 200,000 years ago, right? Yes. Yeah, so if you basically look at the figure, again, very rough details, we're not going deep into it. We have like all these five ranges of human evolution. Majorly, we will be talking about these three. Like your chapter talks about these three, but we're not going to talk about in detail because obviously we don't have the syllabus for board examinations, right? So archaeologists basically attempted, like what do archaeologists do, right? Basically they try to reconstruct things, right? Through looking at various material remains, various archaeological factors. The thing archaeologists do is basically reconstructing how they lived, right? In terms of what kind of houses they built, or like did they just live under a tree, did they live in a cave, or did they have like a properly constructed house, right? And what kind of food did they eat? Did they survive on eating animal meat, or did they gather plant produce like fruits, roots, and all that stuff, right? And also the ways in which they express themselves. It's kind of very important for us to realize that language, or like the number of languages we speak right now, did not exist back then when Homo habitus and Homo erectus were there, right? They did not have a language. They just used to communicate either through like gestures, right? Like just by pointing out to something or by pictures, right? But they did not have like a certain language to be spoken. So at what point of time in history did the language come up, and how the form of expression changed with the development of languages, right? So we will look at the first chapter is going to deal with all these things, again, which we are not going to deal in detail, right? But there's also the development of fire in the same period, right? One question we need to ask ourselves, again, which is very relevant, pay attention to this point, guys. If you look at various parts of the Indian subcontinent even today, like be it anywhere, be it in the north, south, east, west, we will come across groups like hunter gatherers, right? Basically they do not have like a settled lifestyle. They just roam in the forest, wild areas, they hunt animals, and that is how they get their food, right? So even today in the 21st century, we still have communities of hunter gatherers. So if you look at them, like now if you go and look at their lifestyle, the way they lead their life, what is their day-to-day functioning and all that stuff, is it possible for us as 21st century history students to evaluate how the hunter-gatherers lived in the past, right? So this is one comparative question, or like an analogy we can draw, comparing the 21st century hunter-gatherers to the hunter-gatherers lived like several million years ago. Is it possible that we can understand their lifestyles by looking at hunter-gatherers now, right? So this is a question most of the scholars or historians pose, for which again we do not have a certain answer, right? We still need to work on that particular academia, right? Yes. The same question is being raised up again and again, guys, regarding the elimination of chapter 1 from the syllabus. Lopamudra, Bharadwaj and Swati, I'm reiterating my point again. I get it, this chapter is not a part of the syllabus. It's just like 1-2 introduction slides I have inserted as a part of this today's class. But from the next slide, we will be dealing with the introduction to chapter 2. So don't worry about that. Just as like a background, just for you all to know what existed before chapter 2, I had to put in a couple of slides, right? Yes, so now we will be dealing with chapter 2. This chapter is very much a part of your syllabus, in fact an important one, right? So please pay attention. Right, the theme 2 we'll be discussing here is early cities, right? So it's not that right from the beginning, right from when humans started living, cities weren't there. Like it took a lot of years, like almost several millenniums, like several thousand years for cities to come up, right? So how did these cities come up? Like what led to the emergence of these cities? And like once they emerged, what were the developments that were happening? Like there are like hundreds of questions we can ask with relating to the emergence of cities, right? So we will deal with those questions in this particular chapter, and the main focus of this today's class is also the same, right? So in great detail we'll be looking at cities like Mesopotamia, which is in present day Iraq, right? We'll be looking at Iraq in detail in this chapter, and one thing to be noted is the situation or like the location of these cities, right? Like randomly you can't pick a place and like blow that place out of proportion into a city, right? It needs like a specific strategic location, right? So one strategic location for building of cities in ancient India was the temples. Like if temples were already there, the fact that many people used to come and visit those temples, like there was a lot of trade which was already happening, like internal trade as well as external trade with other different parts of the other world. The fact that there were so many people living there, it was kind of easy then for a city to be developed, right? So the location of temples and the already location of long distance trade, like these two are the factors, or like they act as a strategic location for a city to come up, right? And that is exactly how Mesopotamia came up, right? So what are the sources we have to talk about people belonging to that era, right? If you look at like generally sources in history, again guys, the point I'm going to make right now is universally applicable to any era in history, so please remember it. Usually the sources are of two types. The first is textual sources, the next is archaeological sources, right? So in order for textual sources to be there, to exist, it is very important that a language has to be there and people should know how to write, and also archaeologists must have deciphered it. But we do not have textual evidences for every period, like especially the beginning years. Like even during like Harappa period and before Harappa period also, we do not have textual evidences, we do not have written sources, and even if we do, sometimes archaeologists have not deciphered the script yet, right? So textual evidences are not always available to us, but one kind of sources which are always at our disposal are archaeological sources. Archaeological sources basically mean the remains, right? Like the material remains or like the physical things which are existing even today. Like even if you look at like fossils or like plants and animal remains, or if you move a little bit further into the Mauryan era or the Guptan era, we'll also come across coins or inscriptions, and all these sources are categorized as archaeological sources, right? So when we are talking about chapter 2, the theme 2, which basically deals with cities, mostly we will be looking at archaeological sources, right? That doesn't mean textual sources aren't there. Eventually textual sources also came up, so it is a mixture of archaeological and textual sources which give us information about whatever we are going to read today, right? That's basically this point: archaeological evidences of old settlements and abundance of written material, right? Any questions still here? Oh, okay. So somebody's asking about the timetable. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, the 12th standard classes will be conducted, Devika. So it's Tuesday today. So Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, it's for standard 11th. So yes, if this is not for you, I think you can leave. Yeah. So no questions still here. So I can move forward. Right. So there are a lot of other people also coming up, like especially pastoral people, right? So pastoral people also played an important role in these towns, like they contributed to the development of the town, right? So the central question of this particular chapter is this. This statement is basically going to sum up the whole basis on which this chapter is based, right? So all these activities that were happening in the cities, be it the construction of temples, be it the political history, be it how the societies are being functioned, be it the social status of people in the society, the economic developments, the trades happening, the art and architecture, whatever it is, if you look at all these activities from different spheres happening in all these cities, you just have to question on one thing, right? Like this chapter basically questions one thing: would all these activities have been possible if writing was not developed, right? So that is the central theme of this argument. Again, we do not have an answer right now. We will look at it, we will deal with the various questions, various arguments in this chapter, and then we will definitely have an answer for this question, right? So whenever you're dealing with chapter 2, always keep this question at the back of your head, right? Yes, so cool. We will move on from here. Yes. Yeah. So as we all know that initially we did not have like proper cities or villages. Then where did people live, right? So that is a central question. If not for cities and villages, if not for permanent homes or houses, where did people live? Like obviously people needed a place to live, right? So the answer to this question is they lived in the forests, and obviously in the caves. There were a lot of caves. If you look at the ancient world, they lived in all those caves, and sometimes if they do not find caves, they created temporary shelters for themselves. Like what I mean by temporary shelters is that the structure is very weak, very delicate, right? It was just like a temporary thing. It could very easily be destroyed or devastated, right? Like if suppose let's say there's a sudden storm or like some natural calamity, easily that house must have been washed away or like destroyed. That is how weak the temporary shelters are, right? Because there was no permanent settlement happening. People kept moving from one place to another, especially nomadic populations, right? So because of this, there were only weak structures being built, or sometimes people just lived in the caves, right? So as time passed by, as millions of years passed by, only then cities and villages came up. Only then people started settling at a particular place for a longer duration of time, and only then people started constructing houses for themselves, right? Like a settled population, right? Exactly. The point says that the process or the story for this particular transformation from forests to cities and villages, this is a pretty long one which happened over several thousands of years, right? So I think almost like the first cities came up around 3000 3000 BCE, right? So even before 3000 BCE, there was this transformation happening, like slow changes, and that is exactly when the first cities came into being 3000 years ago, right? Yeah. So that is that, and also that is about the settlement, right? Like, where did people live? The next question is, what did people do, right? They are living at a particular place for a longer duration, means that they did something on a daily basis, which basically today we call as occupation, right? Like the job or like the day-to-day activities we do, right? So there was a shift in that also. Initially, like honestly speaking, people didn't have any work to do while they were living in the forest. They just did activities for their own survival, like for their own sustenance, right? Like for instance, they needed food to eat. They went around roaming in the forest to collect various berries or fruits or roots, right? And they ate them. And sometimes they hunted animals, again for their own survival and food. But once people started having a settled living, a settled lifestyle, that is when they shifted to agriculture, right? So they kind of realized that agriculture is really important. They can't keep relying on natural sources. They need to do something for their survival, and that is when they started cultivating crops, right? So when did this begin is the main question. So when did this agriculture begin? It almost happened 10,000 years ago. We are talking about millions of years right now, like almost 6 million years we are dealing with. But the process of agriculture or cultivating crops has only developed 10,000 years ago, right? Again, this point is important. This date is really important. Please remember this 10,000 years ago mark, guys, right? Yes, as I was mentioning earlier, prior to agriculture, people just gathered whatever plant produce they can from the forest, right? So they kind of realized that they can't rely on the natural sources forever, and that is when they started learning about the different kinds of plants, right? And how can they be grown, or like where can they be grown, what are the suitable situations, or what is a suitable temperature for plants to be grown, and in what seasons, at what point of at what time of the year does a particular plant bear a fruit or like a vegetable, right? They started learning all these complicated things related to cultivation of crops, right? Because only then it will be useful for them to put in so much effort and practice agriculture. If they don't have enough knowledge, then there's no point doing it, because eventually there will be no productivity, right? So that was the point of learning everything. Yes, so okay, so hello to people who have joined right now. Yeah, so I don't see any questions here. Quickly, we'll move on. Just to give you like a brief list of which plants were grown in which parts of the world. Firstly, we will look at West Asia, right? In West Asia, the weather is as such that Crops like wheat, barley, peas, and various other, these crops were very suitable for the temperatures or climate in West Asia. But if Asia, crops like millets and rice were grown, and at the same time in Africa, millets were grown as well, right? Again, this is just like a rough list. You don't have to remember it basically, right? Around at the same time, like when all this agriculture was coming up, which was basically 10,000 years ago, during the same time, people also learned how to domesticate animals, right? Initially, the only purpose of animals was to kill, like was to hunt animals and consume their meat. But at a certain point, people started realizing that there are many more benefits, right, which we can have by domesticating animals, right? For example, if you domesticate cattle or like goat or sheep, you will obviously get milk. Again, milk is, you can consume milk, that is for your sustenance or survival, right? And for example, donkeys, right? Donkeys back in those days were used as carriers. Like if you want to, like, suppose you're going to a forest and getting wood for firework, for firewood purposes, you can cut the trees, like, or the timber, whichever is there, and put it on a donkey and bring them to your homes, like transportation purposes, right? So they started realizing that not just meat, but there are several other uses to animals as well, and that is the time they started domesticating all these animals, right? And also, if you look at plants, for example, like cotton plants or like flax plants, cotton plant is basically the cotton cloth can be made, and from flax seeds or flax plants, linen cloth can be made. I'm sure everybody must heard of this material, right? Like linen. So yeah, from the cotton and flax plants, they used to collect all these, and eventually they used to wove these into cotton cloth and linen cloth. Not just plant fibers but also animal fibers, for example wool collected from sheep and all, they used to wove this into the material, the cloth, right? Yeah. And last point of the slide is some 5,000 years ago, right? Domesticated animals were harnessed to plows and carts. Again, this is another new use of animals, right? They are making carts and they are tying the animals to these carts, which basically are used for agriculture, right? Like for plowing purposes, right? So as years passed by, people started realizing things, like that, gaining that knowledge as to how the world can work, like the new ways in which the world can work, right? So today's class is basically about that only, like how people started realizing the value of things, how people started inventing various things, right? Yeah. So those are a couple of changes, right? Agriculture, settled lifestyle, domestication, these are some developments which were happening. At the same time, because of those developments, some other things are also being changed, like a direct relation, right? Like these developments in turn are leading to other changes. What are they, right? Like for example, if you look at this point, for example, growing crops meant that they had to stay in the same place till the crop ripened, right? So when we were talking about agriculture and settled lifestyle, the fact that they are growing crops, right? Let's take a crop X, or like a or some rice or wheat or whatever it is. If you're sowing seeds, you definitely have to put in effort and wait till the crop is harvested. So let's just roughly say the crop is going to take like 3 months or 6 months, whatever it is, for it to be harvested. So that means you have to stay in that particular place to look after that crop, right? To give it various natural manures like cow dung or whatever it is. And you need to make sure that the crop is growing in a very healthy manner. For that to happen, you can't roam here and there. You can't keep shifting places from one place to another. Instead, you have to settle down at a particular place. So agriculture directly meant that people started having a settled lifestyle, right? So I'll just put the word here, it's very important. Settled lifestyle. There were no more nomadic people. Like, people stopped roaming here and there. They had a settled lifestyle. They settled at a particular place, constructed their own homes, right? Like permanent structures, right? Exactly. They started constructing permanent structures or buildings to live in, right? Along with that, various other communities came up. Communities like potters, right? They came up with how to make pottery. And an interesting thing about pottery is that it had multi-purpose. It was a multi-purpose thing, right? Like, it had multiple uses. For example, you can store materials in the pots, like whatever grains you're getting by practicing agriculture or any other things. You can use pots to store these materials, but on the other side, you can also cook in these pots, right? So again, this is a change point here. Initially, we see that people ate raw food. People ate raw fruits, raw vegetables, even meat and all. They hardly cooked. Like, sometimes they did, but mostly they consumed it raw. But with the invention of fire, with the invention of pottery, they started cooking food, right? They started processing food, not just to make them tasty, but also the processed food is more digestible than the raw one, right? Like, it affects your own health. So that is why people started processing food in order for it to be digested easily. And how did they do that? By making use of the pots, right? So pots had like a multi-purpose use. Yeah, so the way in which the stone tools were made was also changed. Because if you look at like tools from the earlier period, like from the even more ancient times, they are very rugged or like not so smooth. They were not so sharp also, like basically they were blunt. But as time passed by, if you look at this particular era we are talking about, tools became basically smoothened and polished, right? They polished all the tools. They smoothened the tools, and that is how they became sharp, and it could be easy that you cut all the meat or any other things, whatever you have to cut, by using these stone tools, right? So that was like a easy process. That was like an advancement, right? Is new equipment. Again, we're still on the page of tools. There are a range of them, right, used for different things. There are the new inventions that were made basically are mortars and pestles. And what were they used? Grain. And there were also stone axes and hoes, which were used to plow the land in the first place and also harvest the crop once it is done, right? So we'll just have a look at how did mortars or pestles or axes or hoes look like in the next slide. So this thing is basically the mortar, right? And the stick like thing here is the pestle, right? So if there are any grains, you put all those grains in the mortar and grind them with. So this is how a pestle and mortar look like. Again, this is like a modern figure, the ones which we use right now in the 21st century, but almost the shape and the use were the same back then also. These are stone axes, right? So this is the stone, right? 21st century, there's a stick usually to which a metal is attached, right? Like usually iron. Mostly it's always iron, but back then instead of iron or various metals, stone used to be obviously the same to plow the fields or to harvest the crops, right? And yes, what else did we talk about? We talked about hoes, right? For the fields, right? So to like this was the like the handle you're supposed to catch, and this is inserted into the ground, right? Any questions still here? They were very people also learned how to tap ores of metals. Like if there's a rock or something, people learned how to tap ores from them. They were used to make tools, right? Copper ores were especially famous, color to them. which is basically bluish green in color. Jewelry as well, color which is bluish green to make jewelry, right? And the next thing is growing lands. By this time, people started traveling from one place to another, right? For trade purposes, exchanging ideas, exchanging tools, exchanging. People were Yes, so as people were traveling, it was the platform where people could exchange goods and ideas, and that is how people got to know about various other things which were being produced, like precious and semi-precious stones or other metals or like shell, right? Yeah. So if we move on, just give me a second, guys. Increasing trade, obviously, the growth of villages when moving from one place to another. So this kind of led to the emergence of small states. This is a very important development we need to look at, and to be very specific, these emergence of states or right, in the previous classes, all that stuff, right? Like, so yeah, coming up in the Indian subcontinent, but were also coming up in other parts of the world as well, right? So yes, so the growth of villages was happening, the growth of towns was happening, right? For several thousand years. It did not just happen over one night, right? It took like almost several thousand years for kingdoms to come up. All these changes that consequences, right? Like if you look at like historians on the changes that were happening back in those, call it a revolution, right? Like what does basically a revolution mean? Like a sudden change, or is there today after the revolution change, like a new things come up. The lives of people were highly transformed. Yes. So another, not just for this chapter, but like throughout the is really important, guys, because if you're moving from work practices which are continued, but at the same time important to keep a note of what things are being changed and what things are remaining constant. Historical, like academia, you need to remember. Chapter 2 in detail, right? And if you look at, like, we look in a certain way right now, like our physical appearance is in a certain way. So if you in the humans, or like the modern history, they originated almost 160, right? So there's another point you need to remember. And scavenging or hunting animals or gathering plant produce, as we have already discussed in the start of this, also like stone tools coming up. And again, the same question I asked you all to remember, if you look at the hunter gatherers in today's time, is it possible for us to understand the lifestyle of the hunter gatherers back in those times, right? So that's a couple of questions. And any questions till here, please put them down in the chat box. Any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions per se. Yes, so we'll continue. But if there are any questions, please put them down in the chat box. Yeah, so I'll quickly run through this slide as well. Discoveries of human fossils, stone tools, and even cave paintings. These are basically the sources we have to know about what happened back in those times, right? So again, each of the discoveries like how humans came into being or stuff like that, they had a history of its own. Like every discovery, if you look at, there is always a history attached to it. It just didn't appear overnight, but there's definitely a history of its own. And also, sometimes the intriguing factor here is that when you find something, like when scholars or archaeologists found out something and they showed it to the rest of the world, most of the scholars refuse to accept these fossils that they belong to the early humans, right? They refuse that whole theory, and we will look at one such example in the coming slides as to why they refuse that theory, right? And they were basically skeptical about the ability of the early humans to make stone tools or paint. Like they were always like very doubtful as to, like really, like the people belonging to the early periods, like the early humans, were they capable enough to make and manufacture all these stone tools? Or like if you look at all these caves and all these caves were painted, right? Like just like a hobby or something, people used to paint in the caves. So if you look at these paintings, scholars used to wonder, like really did early humans have this capability to paint the caves, right? They always wondered about these things. It was only as the time passed by, like over a period of time, that historians or scholars started realizing that yes, these finds do definitely have a value to them, and they realized the true significance, right? And evidence of human evolution comes from fossils, right? Like we all know, if you want to know about the humans from a long time ago, it's really important for us to look at the humans, so the fossils, right? Not just humans, but also animals and plant fossils, right? Yeah, the next point is you can actually date these fossils either through direct methods or indirect methods. Again, this is a very scientific approach, or like a scientific process. The thing is, if you're looking at it, if you're trying to date the fossil through a direct methods, the chemical analysis is done. Like you take that particular fossil and then some chemical analysis is done, and then it will tell you to which period did this fossil belong to. But at the same time, there are some fossils on which you can't carry out a direct analysis. You need a indirect technique, like an indirect method of dating, right? So here the sediments are examined. If you look at most of the fossils, guys, the interesting factor is fossils do not exist on their own. They are always embedded in sediments, right? Like this is a rock, for example. In the rock there is a fossil. Like fossils always appear within the rocks or other sediments, right? So if you date the sediments, if you date the rocks to which period did they belong to, then you will find out about the age of the fossils, right? So these are some of the techniques of dating. And once, obviously, if you have all those dates with you, it's very easy for us to arrange them in a chronological order, or like to arrange them in a sequence, right? And here is an example why we look at why some of the scholars rejected that these fossils belong to early humans, right? We look at the reason. The reason being that they believed in the Old Testament of the Bible, right? So mostly Christians, right? Like most of the westernized part of the world, they followed Christianity, they followed Bible. Like the primary book for them is Bible, and whatever Bible said is the truth for them, right? So when people read Bible, they came across this line that all, like everything is created by God, right? So it is against the theory of scientific method, right? So that is why, because the religion and scientificity were in contradiction to each other, initially the scholars rejected the theory of early human fossils, right? So we look at an example from that. For instance, in the year of 1856, like almost 150 years back, In the month of August, there were a couple of men who were doing out their own work. Basically, it was a limestone quarries. They were working in those quarries, and where did this incident happen? It happened in the Neander Valley, right? This Neander Valley is located near to the German city of Dusseldorf, right? And they came across a skull there, right? Like a human skull, and also a couple of other skeletal fragments, like not just the whole skeletal system, but like pieces of the skeletal system. So what did they do with this, right? They went and handed it over to a person called Karl Fullrot, right? He was a local schoolmaster, and alongside he was also a natural historian. They handed over the skull and skeletal fragments to him, to Karl, and Carl kind of realized that these skeletons did not belong to the modern humans, but in fact, they date back almost a million years before, right? He understood that, he came up with that conclusion, but just to check it up whether he was right or not, he sent the same skull and the skeletal fragments to a person called Hermann Schaffhausen, right? He was a professor of anatomy at a local university there, at a Bonn university, right? So these two worked on this skull and skeletal fragments, and in the following year, in the year 1857, they published a academic paper, right? What did they claim in that paper is that they said that the skull belonged to a form of human which is extinct right now. The skull is not of the modern human, but in fact it belonged to a human which is no more, which the form of humans is extinct, right? So this is the claim that most of the scholars or historians rejected back in the 19th century, right? Because again, it was contradicting the idea or the concepts written in the Bible, right? So that is why most of the scholars rejected rejected the theory of early human fossils, right? So yes, that is it we have for today. I hope everybody followed today's class, and this is just like an introduction, guys. So all the 11th standard students, from Thursday, we'll have like a full-fledged introduction to theme 2, where we'll be talking about the emergence of cities and all. So this class is just supposed to be like an introduction class to give you a background as to what existed a couple of right, a couple of millenniums ago, or like a couple of centuries ago, right? Yes, so I hope everybody understood the class, and if you all have any questions or concerns or any suggestions, please put them down in the chat box, or even after the live stream ends, you can put them down in the comment section, which I will definitely refer to and incorporate any changes or answer your questions, right? If you all have any right now, you can ask them in the chat box. In the meanwhile, I will wind this chapter up, right? So yes, about the pitch made earlier in the beginning of the class, if you want to subscribe to either of them, either Unacademy Plus or Unacademy Iconic, you all can use my code TUM10 and get a 10% off straight away while you are subscribing, right? And yes, if you like the content of these videos, please do like the video, share it as much as possible, and also subscribe to the channel Unacademy, guys. Thank you so much for coming in and tuning in. And remember, for the 11th, again I'm telling the timetable. It's on Tuesday, sorry, yes, so I was telling it's on Tuesday, Thursdays and Saturdays, but for 11th standard kids it's going to be for the 12th standard kids, it's going to be on Monday, Wednesday and Friday, right? So I hope everybody remembers the timetable. And yes, that is the end of it. Okay, some Radhika says hello. Hi Radhika, did you just join? Okay, so you're from class 11, right? If possible, we can have like a quick round of introductions in the next class. I just want to get through the basic introduction to the book today. So that is why I didn't have time to do your introductions. So yes, we'll have like a couple of minutes allotted to it in the next class, if that is okay. Oh, about the 11th standard timings. The timings are the same, Radhika. It's going to be at 6 p.m. every day in the evening. But the days of the week for 11th standard are Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Right? Like the alternate days. I hope that is clear, Radhika. Yes. So that is it we have for today. And thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. I hope to see you all on Thursday's class again at 6 p.m. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone, in the meantime. Bye. I'll see you guys again on Thursday. Have a good evening.